At 65, the tragedy of Marie Osmond is beyond heartbreaking. Once she was the radiant jewel of American television, the angelic voice that lit up living rooms across the nation. With her flawless smile and pure innocence, she seemed untouchable, Hollywood's eternal sweetheart. But behind those glittering lights, behind every rehearsed smile, was a young girl forced to sacrifice her childhood, a woman stripped of her freedom, and a mother who endured a loss so profound it scarred her soul forever. This is not the story of stardom, it is the story of survival. At only 3 years old, Marie's destiny was no longer hers. While other children chased butterflies, she stood beneath scorching studio lights, clutching a microphone, already performing, already giving pieces of herself away. And though the world applauded, her heart carried wounds no applause could heal. In the years to come, she would battle body image torment, collapse under industry cruelty, and quietly carry the trauma of abuse. She would fall in love, lose it all, try again, and then again. And just when life seemed bearable, tragedy struck her home, tearing her apart in the most unthinkable way, burying her beloved son Michael. Yet perhaps the most shocking revelation came later. Despite her estimated $20 million fortune, Marie announced she would leave none of it to her children. Why would a woman so devoted as a mother make such a decision? Was it strength, defiance, or a quiet cry from someone who had endured too much? This is the untold journey of Marie Osmond, the performer who smiled for the world while silently breaking inside. A story of beauty and fame, but also of scars, secrets, and survival. But the darkest chapters of her life were still waiting to be revealed. To understand the tragedy of Marie Osmond, one must first understand the era that shaped her. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a golden age of American television variety shows, an era when families gathered around the glowing box in their living rooms searching for innocence, lighthearted joy, and entertainment that could bring generations together. And in the middle of that cultural moment stood the Osmond family, a clan of 9 children raised under strict Mormon values, disciplined not only in faith, but in music, performance, and perfection. The Osmonds were more than just a family. They were an empire carefully crafted for the spotlight. Harmonies were drilled into them like prayers, rehearsals stretched longer than school lessons, and the pursuit of flawless entertainment left no room for imperfection. Marie Osmond, born in 1959, was the only daughter, the shining centerpiece in a constellation of brothers. While Donnie became her most visible partner on stage, Marie herself was branded as America's sweetheart, the delicate balance to her brother's energetic performances. She was the gentle voice, the warm smile, the image of purity that audiences could adore without hesitation. Yet this image came at a devastating cost. Unlike many stars who discover fame after adolescence, Marie never knew life outside of the spotlight. She was not a child who stumbled into stardom. She was born into it, molded into it, and chained to it. From the moment she appeared on the Andy Williams Show in 1962, at just 3 years old, the world would never again see Marie as an ordinary girl. Her parents, Olive and George Osmond, carried a vision to raise children who would not just sing, but dominate the entertainment world. And they succeeded. But behind that success was sacrifice. Every child gave up freedom, but for Marie, the only girl, the expectations were doubled. She was not only a performer, but also a symbol of femininity, wholesomeness, and unattainable perfection in a cutthroat industry. Television executives loved her sweetness. Audiences adored her charm, but few ever stopped to ask who Marie Osmond was beneath the ribbons and sequins. Behind the carefully managed appearances, she was a girl who longed for something simple, a normal life, a childhood, a chance to be ordinary. That chance never came. Her early fame turned her into a product rather than a person. In later interviews, Marie admitted that even as a child, she felt like a brand more than a daughter. She once confessed, "I felt more like a product than a child." That chilling truth set the stage for a lifetime of struggles, hidden pain, and silent endurance. As she grew, the spotlight only grew harsher. For every ovation there was criticism, for every smile there was pressure, and soon the world's sweetheart would find herself drowning beneath expectations no teenager should ever face. Marie Osmond's story is not merely about her rise to fame, it is about how that fame shaped, controlled, and nearly destroyed her. Because while America watched a bright-eyed girl blossom into a star behind the curtain, she was fighting battles no one could see, and her childhood, the very foundation of her life, was about to reveal the first cracks of a tragedy that would haunt her forever. Marie Osmond's story begins not in the dazzling lights of Hollywood, but in the small town of Ogden, Utah, where she was born on October 13, 1959. She was the eighth child and the only daughter of Olive and George Osmond. While that detail may seem simple, it defined her entire existence. Being the only girl in a family of 9 children made her both precious and pressured. She wasn't just another sibling. She was the balance, the contrast, the symbol of femininity in a family destined for fame. From her earliest days, the Osmond household was unlike any other. Devoutly Mormon, the children were raised with rigid discipline. Faith, family, and music, those were the pillars. While other little girls in Utah clutched dolls and skipped rope, Marie was handed a microphone and told to smile. Her brothers had already begun their journey as performers, but Marie was different. To the world, she wasn't just another voice, she was the image of innocence, and that made her indispensable. At just 3 years old, Marie made her first appearance on The Andy Williams Show. Most toddlers might forget such a moment, but for Marie, it wasn't a one-time thrill. It was the beginning of a lifelong contract with fame. From that moment, the stage owned her. Her family's dream of legacy became her reality, whether she wanted it or not. The Osmonds were relentless in their pursuit of perfection. Each child had to learn instruments, harmonies, and performance etiquette. Mistakes were not tolerated. Childhood was not an option. Marie once asked her mother if she could go outside to play. The response was chilling in its simplicity. "No, you can't go. You have work to do." For Marie, those words were a sentence. She was no longer a little girl. She was a performer. The industry took full advantage. At only 11, Marie was sent to Japan for a commercial shoot, a glamorous opportunity on the surface. But the trip turned into a nightmare when the boat she was traveling on capsized. She found herself stranded in shark-infested waters, blistered by the sun, dehydrated and terrified. Any other child would have been given time to recover, but not Marie. Barely rescued, still in pain, she was ordered back into the recording studio. "I was covered in burns," she later recalled, "and still I was told to smile and sing. It's tragic, it's cruel, and it's heartbreakingly real." These moments shaped her childhood, not with laughter, but with trauma. While her peers were forming friendships, experimenting with freedom, and discovering identity, Marie was learning to disconnect from her own feelings. She masked exhaustion with smiles, buried pain beneath sequins, and slowly began to live 2 lives: the radiant star America adored, and the silent, broken child hiding inside. In her memoir, Behind the Smile, Marie revealed the deep confusion of those years, the emptiness that accompanied fame. Even as millions tuned in to watch her, she felt isolated, unseen, and unheard. She admitted she never had the luxury of innocence. Her childhood wasn't lost, it was stolen. And yet, paradoxically, those same pressures hardened her spirit. The resilience forged in those years would later carry her through heartbreaks far greater than the world could imagine. She wasn't merely being trained to perform, she was being conditioned to survive. Still behind every standing ovation remained a haunting truth. Marie Osmond never got to be a child, and as she grew older, the cracks beneath the perfect image began to widen. because while the world saw America's sweetheart, Marie was already entering a silent war with herself, a war that would deepen as she became a teenager thrust into the unforgiving spotlight of primetime television. And just when she thought childhood's trials were the worst, she would endure fame came calling again, this time with demands far more dangerous. By the mid-1970s, Marie Osmond was no longer just a little girl forced to grow up too quickly. She was a household name. At only 15, she became the shining face of the Donnie and Marie Show, a prime-time variety program that would forever cement her place in American pop culture. The show was bright, cheerful, and family-friendly, a perfect reflection of what audiences wanted: purity, optimism, and a slice of Americana wrapped in song and laughter. To millions, Marie was radiant, her innocence glowing beside her brother Donnie's youthful charm. But behind the polished exterior was a teenager, suffocating under the weight of comparison. She often shared the stage with glamorous stars of the era: Jaclyn Smith, Farrah Fawcett, Raquel Welch. Next to them, Marie felt like a child playing dress-up. She later confessed, "I felt like I was pretending to be a star." That self-doubt quickly grew into something darker. The pressure to look perfect in front of millions became unbearable. Studio executives delivered a chilling ultimatum: lose 10 pounds or risk cancellation. At the time, Marie weighed only 103 pounds. Terrified of losing everything she had worked for, or rather, everything that had been forced upon her, she complied. She starved herself down to 93 pounds, surviving on a dangerous concoction of lemon juice, cayenne pepper, and maple syrup. This punishing Hollywood diet was a cruel regimen for anyone, let alone a teenage girl still trying to figure out who she was. Marie admitted that fasting before tapings became routine. Costumes became shackles, symbols of approval, and she believed that her worth depended on squeezing into them. By her early 20s, the situation spiraled into full-blown eating disorders. She battled both anorexia and bulimia, a silent torment that nearly consumed her. In a 2018 interview, Marie revealed the heartbreaking truth: "They called me an embarrassment. At 103 pounds, I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to feel. It was the only way I could take back control." But food was not the only battle she fought. In a 2019 appearance on The Talk, Marie opened up about being physically abused as a child, trauma she had kept hidden for decades. That revelation cast her struggles in a new, devastating light. Her obsession with weight wasn't about vanity, it was about survival. It was a way to regain control in a world that had repeatedly taken it from her. Through all of this, she never stopped performing. Every time she stepped on stage, she wore her brightest smile. Every round of applause came at the cost of another wound carved into her spirit. Audiences saw perfection, but behind the curtain, Marie was bleeding silently. Her teen years, remembered by millions as a time of stardom and success, were in truth years of punishment. Emotional punishment from relentless expectations, physical punishment from starving and purging, psychological punishment from the constant demand for perfection. Yet she endured. She endured for her family, for her fans, and perhaps most tragically, for the little girl inside her who never had a chance to live. In those years, Marie Osmond didn't just grow up in front of America, she fractured behind its curtain. Still, she clung to one thing that kept her moving forward: hope. Hope that someday love, not applause, would fill the emptiness. And soon she would chase that dream of love, only to find heartbreak waiting for her again and again. By the late 1970s, Marie Osmond was no longer just a rising star, she was an icon. With the Donnie and Marie Show in full swing, her face graced magazine covers, her voice filled radio waves, and her image became synonymous with the wholesome all-American dream. She was the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect performer. At least that's what America wanted to believe. The variety show was a cultural phenomenon. Families tuned in religiously each week, not just for the music, but for the chemistry between Donnie and Marie. Their sibling banter, their coordinated costumes, their radiant smiles, it all seemed effortless. Marie's ability to balance humor, charm, and vulnerability made her a standout. She wasn't just Donnie's sidekick, she was the heart of the show. But while the spotlight made her famous, it also cast unforgiving shadows. Perfection was not optional, it was demanded. Studio executives, advertisers, and fans alike held her to an impossible standard. Marie herself admitted that she often felt like she was performing purity, a role she could never step away from. Even as the show flourished, cracks began to form in her personal life. The attention was overwhelming, the comparisons to Hollywood bombshells suffocating. Yet Marie pushed forward. She released her first solo single, Paper Roses, in 1973, which became an instant hit. At only 14 years old, she had a #1 country hit on the Billboard chart, a feat that not only set her apart from her brothers, but also solidified her as a solo artist in her own right. Her voice, angelic yet tinged with melancholy, captured the innocence and heartbreak of youth. Fans adored her, critics praised her, and the industry embraced her as a rare female talent who could hold her own amid a sea of male performers. For a brief moment, it seemed Marie had it all: fame, adoration, and the promise of a glittering future. But behind the stage lights, the battles with self-image and emotional scars never left her. Standing next to legends like Raquel Welch and Farrah Fawcett, Marie felt inadequate, convinced she could never measure up. That insecurity fueled her dangerous cycles of dieting and self-punishment. Yet night after night, she walked onto stage with a smile so convincing that even her closest friends were fooled. Despite the private torment, Marie's professional success soared. Her presence on television turned her into one of the most recognizable women in America. She was invited to perform at major events, her album sold millions, and her face became a staple in pop culture. By the 1980s, she was more than a celebrity, she was a brand. But fame came with isolation. Marie once reflected, "The applause is loud, but the silence afterward is louder." She lived surrounded by people, yet felt profoundly alone. She gave her audience joy while privately carrying sorrow. Her relationships during this period mirrored her inner chaos. She briefly dated Michael McDonald of the Doobie Brothers, a tender but fleeting connection. Then came Andy Gibb, whose charm won her heart, but whose struggles with addiction made their love impossible. Later, she was linked to David Cassidy, another teen idol. On the outside, these romances seemed perfect, two young stars in love. But beneath the glamour, they were fragile, unable to withstand the pressures of fame. For Marie, love was always just out of reach. Every relationship promised stability, but dissolved into disappointment. Still, she carried herself with grace. In interviews, she spoke kindly of her past partners, often highlighting their struggles rather than her own heartbreak. "He had the kindest heart. I only wish the world had been kinder to him," she once said of Andy Gibb. As the 1980s progressed, Marie tried to step out of the variety show image and craft a life of her own. In 1982, at just 22, she married Steve Craig, a basketball player she believed would give her the normal life she craved. For a brief time, she seemed anchored. The couple welcomed a son, Steven, and Marie believed she had finally found peace away from the spotlight. But fairy tales don't last. Just 3 years later, the marriage crumbled. The public divorce left her reeling. She later admitted, "I felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a mother." In 1986, Marie remarried, this time to Brian Bloseel. For over 2 decades, they built a large blended family with 8 children. On the surface, it appeared to be stability at last, but behind closed doors, emotional distance and unresolved pain lingered. Marie rarely spoke about the struggles, but when she did, her words revealed exhaustion. "I was tired of pretending everything was okay." It wasn't. Even during her so-called peak, when the world adored her, Marie Osmond's reality was heartbreakingly different. The applause was thunderous, but when the curtains fell, she faced only silence, self-doubt, and a longing for something more than fame could ever give. Her life in the 1970s and 1980s was a paradox. The higher she climbed, the more fragile she became. And just when it seemed she had endured enough, life was about to test her in ways no spotlight could ever prepare her for, because the next chapter of Marie Osmond's life would not be about fame at all. It would be about tragedy, survival, and the unbearable weight of loss. At the height of her fame, the world believed Marie Osmond had it all: success, beauty, a loving family. But life behind the glitter was far darker than the audience could ever imagine. Fame, instead of bringing freedom, became a gilded cage. And within that cage, Marie endured some of the most devastating tragedies of any Hollywood star. By the late 1990s, the cracks in her carefully maintained image were impossible to ignore. After giving birth to her seventh child, Matthew, in 1999, Marie was no longer the bright, smiling figure that fans remembered. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and drowning under the weight of something she could not yet name. Soon, the diagnosis came: postpartum depression. In a raw interview with TV Guide, she admitted, "I couldn't function. My body ached, my arms wouldn't move, and my thoughts terrified me." What many dismissed as baby blues was in truth a consuming darkness. At her lowest, she walked out of her home, leaving her children with a babysitter, and drove aimlessly for days, unsure if she would ever return. It was a haunting prelude to a much deeper pain that would come years later. Her battle with mental illness was further complicated by the public's misunderstanding. In 2006, when tabloids falsely reported that she had attempted to harm herself, Marie became the center of cruel speculation. Her spokesperson clarified it had been a reaction to medication, not a suicide attempt, but the damage was done. The stigma of mental illness only deepened her suffering. Yet instead of retreating, she chose to speak out. She used her platform to talk about depression, shattering the silence around a subject so many women were too afraid to confront. But no public confession, no act of courage could shield her from the storm that was about to consume her life. On February 26, 2010, Marie's world shattered. That night, she was preparing for a performance with her brother Donnie when she received a missed call from her son Michael. Minutes later, the call she did answer was from the coroner's office. Michael, just 18 years old, had fallen from the 8th floor of his Los Angeles apartment. The cause: blunt force trauma. There were no drugs, no alcohol, just a silence too heavy to bear. Marie's beloved son, who had battled depression and bullying, had taken his own life. The note he left behind revealed torment she never fully knew. He had promised her he would never hurt himself, but the relentless cruelty of bullying had stolen his hope. "He had made that promise to me," Marie said, her voice breaking years later. "But he was so bullied he didn't tell me, and because I didn't know, I couldn't help." The grief was unbearable. For days, Marie couldn't eat or sleep. Her entire being seemed to collapse under the weight of guilt. Yet only a few days later, she walked back onto the stage. "The only reason I went back to work," she explained, "was so I wouldn't sit in a room and cry all day." To perform, while her heart was shattering, was not strength, it was survival. Her pain was visible in every note she sang, every word she spoke. In a 2018 interview, Marie confessed, "The truth is, when you're that low, you don't want to die. You just want the pain to stop." It was a sentiment that resonated with millions who had faced the same abyss. Michael's death was not the end of her suffering. It was the beginning of another descent into heartbreak. In 2018, Marie lost a grandchild, a tragedy she rarely speaks of publicly, her silence a testament to the depth of her grief. In 2022, her daughter Jessica's husband was killed in a senseless act of street violence, forcing Marie to once again hold her family together while carrying her own despair. And then, in early 2025, yet another devastating blow, the death of her brother Wayne Osmond at age 73 following a stroke. Wayne had been her confidant, her partner on stage, her source of laughter during dark times. His passing tore yet another jagged wound in a heart already scarred by too many losses. Through all of this, Marie never stopped speaking out about pain. She transformed her grief into purpose, advocating for mental health, anti-bullying campaigns, and the importance of listening. Her voice, once celebrated for sweet melodies, now carried the weight of advocacy and truth. Yet the tragedies left their mark. Friends and fans noticed a new gravity in Marie. She was no longer the bubbly teen idol from the 1970s. She had become a woman marked by sorrow, resilience, and a wisdom that could only come from survival. By the time she reached 65, the heartbreaks of her life had defined her more than the applause ever could. She was no longer just a singer or a performer. She was a mother who had buried a child, a daughter who had lost both parents, a sister who mourned her brothers, a grandmother scarred by grief. And yet she still stood. But what shocked the world most was not her survival nor her grief. It was the decision she made about her legacy, a choice that left even her fans stunned. By the time Marie Osmond reached her 60s, most stars of her generation had retreated from the limelight, choosing quiet retirement, far from the glare of public attention. But Marie's life had never followed the script of others. Instead of fading, she re-emerged, not as the teenage darling of the 1970s, but as a woman reborn through tragedy, faith, and resilience. Her home in St. George, Utah became more than just a luxurious retreat. It became her sanctuary. Nestled in the desert, the 10,000-square-foot mansion stood as a silent witness to both her sorrows and her triumphs. Every corner was touched by her hand filled with memories of the past and tokens of the family she so fiercely loved. There was a recording studio not for chart-topping hits, but for moments of peace where music remained her language of survival. There was laughter in the hallways, grandchildren chasing her as she tried, often unsuccessfully, to outrun them on a bicycle. She once said, "Being a grandma is the best role I've ever had." For Marie, this was not sentiment, it was salvation. The same woman who had been robbed of a childhood now poured her heart into giving her grandchildren the joy and freedom she had never known. Her commitment to health in later years became less about appearance and more about endurance. She walked briskly each day, not to keep up with Hollywood standards, but to keep up with life itself. Rumors of cosmetic surgery circled for years, yet Marie always brushed them aside with grace. "I just want to feel my best. The lines on my face, they're the roads I've traveled." Her face, perhaps changed, still reflected the same spirit, resilient, warm, unshakably human. And then came a love story no one expected. In 2011, nearly 3 decades after divorcing Steve Craig, her first husband Marie remarried him. To outsiders, it seemed impossible. How could two people find their way back after so much time, so much pain? But for Marie, the second chance was deeply symbolic. They chose May 4th as their wedding date, the birthday of both her late son Michael and her beloved mother Olive. "It was my way of including them," she revealed, "of making them part of our happiness." This was not the impulsive romance of youth. This was a love forged in the crucible of loss, endurance, and hard-won wisdom. Together they traveled, laughed, and lived not for appearances, but for peace. "We don't need the world to validate us anymore," Marie said. "We just want peace and love, and we found it." But perhaps the most shocking decision of Marie's later years came not in love, but in legacy. In a revelation that stunned fans, she announced she would not be leaving her $20 million fortune to her children. "I'm not passing on my wealth," she declared. "My kids need to learn to work. If you hand them everything, they get lazy." Critics called her cold. Admirers called her brave. Marie stood firm. To her, this was not about denial, but devotion. "I love my children enough to not make them weak," she explained. Having been raised in a family where every child worked hard, Marie believed the true inheritance she could give her children was resilience. Money fades, purpose does not. Her later life was defined not by appearances on stage, but by choices that reflected a woman transformed. She no longer sang to prove herself. She no longer smiled to mask pain. She sang because music still kept her alive. She smiled because she had learned, after everything, that joy could still exist. At 65, Marie Osmond had become more than a performer. She was a survivor, a grandmother, a wife renewed, and a mother whose greatest legacy was not wealth, but strength. Yet the question remained, what would the world remember about Marie Osmond, the teenage idol, the grieving mother, or the woman who turned tragedy into resilience? That answer would unfold in the legacy she left behind. Marie Osmond's story is one of extremes, unimaginable fame, crushing heartbreak, and resilience that borders on the extraordinary. But beyond the personal tragedies, her journey has carved out a legacy that stretches far beyond her music, her television appearances, or even her family name. It is a legacy that lives in the way she confronted pain publicly, spoke truths others were too afraid to voice, and became a symbol of survival in an industry that thrives on perfection. Culturally, Marie will forever be tied to the golden age of American variety television. For millions of families in the 1970s, the Donnie and Marie show wasn't just entertainment, it was ritual. She and her brother embodied innocence in an era marked by political scandal, cultural upheaval, and social unrest. They reminded Americans of simpler joys, songs sung in harmony, playful sibling banter, and the reassurance of wholesome values. That image, though carefully curated, left an indelible mark on popular culture. But the deeper cultural impact came later, when Marie's life cracked open before the public. In speaking candidly about her eating disorders, she became one of the first major celebrities to acknowledge the dark side of Hollywood's beauty standards. She turned her suffering into a lifeline for countless women who silently battled the same demons. Her confession, "I didn't want to eat, I didn't want to feel, it was the only way I could take back control," still echoes in conversations about body image and the pressures of fame. Her openness about postpartum depression in the late 1990s was equally groundbreaking, at a time when mental health was rarely discussed, especially by public figures. Marie's vulnerability broke taboos. By admitting she had driven away from home, uncertain if she would ever return, she gave voice to mothers everywhere who were too ashamed to speak of their own despair. Later, as the world reeled from the suicide of her son Michael, she again transformed her grief into advocacy. Rather than retreat into silence, she spoke openly about bullying, depression, and the importance of truly listening. In doing so, she gave her son's tragedy a purpose larger than loss. Her cultural impact also extends to her bold stance on inheritance. By refusing to leave her $20 million fortune to her children, she sparked a nationwide conversation about privileged parenting and responsibility. Many criticized her, but others admired her courage to challenge the norm. Marie framed her decision not as denial, but empowerment, teaching her children that resilience and independence matter more than wealth. In a world obsessed with money, her message was a radical act of love. Beyond advocacy, Marie remained a force in entertainment. She sustained a career spanning over 5 decades, an achievement few can claim. She recorded music that resonated across generations, from her teenage hit Paper Roses to her later works, infused with wisdom and sorrow. She reinvented herself as a Las Vegas headliner, performing with Donnie in a residency that lasted more than a decade. And in doing so, she proved that she wasn't just a fleeting teen idol, but an enduring presence in American culture. Her influence rippled into the lives of fans, many of whom saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. To some, she was the symbol of childhood nostalgia. To others, she was proof that survival was possible even when life shattered in ways beyond comprehension. For women in particular, she became both a cautionary tale of Hollywood's cruelty and a beacon of resilience. The myth and reality of Marie Osmond now exist side by side. The myth, America's perfect sweetheart, always smiling, always graceful. The reality, a woman scarred, grieving but unbroken. And perhaps it is this tension between what she was forced to represent and who she truly became that defines her cultural impact. Today, Marie Osmond is not remembered simply as a singer or actress. She is remembered as someone who dared to show her scars in a world that demanded perfection. She is proof that tragedy does not erase legacy, it deepens it. And yet, as her story closes in on its final chapters, one question remains: how should we truly view Marie Osmond? By her achievements or by her flaws, by her fame or by her heartbreak? That is the question that lingers. Looking back at Marie Osmond's life, it's impossible not to feel torn between admiration and sorrow. On one hand, she is a testament to resilience, a woman who endured more heartbreak than most could survive and still found a way to stand tall. On the other, her story is also a haunting reminder of the merciless nature of fame, of how an industry built on applause can quietly consume the very souls it celebrates. Her achievements are undeniable. Marie's career spans over 5 decades of feat that places her among the rare few who manage to outlast the shifting tides of entertainment. She was not only a teenage sensation, but also a chart-topping country singer, a beloved television host, a Vegas headliner, and a cultural icon who left her mark on generations. Her decision to turn private pain into public advocacy is perhaps her greatest achievement. By speaking about body image struggles, postpartum depression, and the suicide of her son, she gave a voice to millions suffering in silence. In this, she transcended celebrity. She became human, relatable, and courageous. But alongside the triumphs, there are flaws. Marie's strict adherence to image during her peak years may have perpetuated unrealistic standards for women at a time when many desperately needed honesty. Her decision not to leave her fortune to her children, while noble in principle, has been criticized as harsh, especially from someone who had lived her entire life within the comfort of fame. Was it a decision of empowerment or an act of control shaped by her own childhood of relentless discipline? And yet, perhaps that is the essence of her story contradictions. Marie is both strength and fragility, joy and grief, discipline and rebellion. Her smile concealed heartbreak, but it also illuminated millions of lives. Her tragedies broke her, but they also gave her a depth that perfection alone could never achieve. For this channel, Marie Osmond represents the duality of celebrity itself. She is the dream and the nightmare, the fantasy and the cost. To admire her is to admire her strength, but to truly understand her is to acknowledge the pain that came with it. So how should she be remembered? As the innocent child star robbed of her youth, as the radiant teen idol who lit up America's screens, as the grieving mother who carried her son's memory into every performance, or as the woman who, despite everything, chose to rise again and again? There is no single answer, and maybe that's the point. Marie Osmond's legacy forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that even the brightest stars cast shadows. But in the end, when the spotlight fades, what lingers is not the applause nor the scandals. It is the haunting question of what it truly means to survive in a world that demands you never break. There is something haunting about the way time reshapes a story. In the 1970s, Marie Osmond was the living embodiment of innocence, a young girl with a smile so bright it seemed untouchable. Today, her name carries the weight of loss, survival, and quiet resilience. Between those two versions of herself lies the true Marie, not the myth America adored, but the woman who endured what most cannot even imagine. For many fans watching her through the decades, is like revisiting a long-lost photograph, one that glows with nostalgia but also carries the shadows of what was hidden just outside the frame. We remember her in sequined costumes, standing beside Donnie, radiating joy. Yet now we can't help but see the child who was forced to perform, the teenager starving herself for acceptance, the mother holding back tears as she buried her son. Her story does not offer the comfort of a fairy tale ending. Instead, it reminds us that survival itself is sometimes the most profound triumph. Marie's voice may have once been celebrated for its sweetness, but her truest song is found in the silence. She carried the grief she transformed and the hope she never fully let go of. In her later years, when she walks across the stage or gives an interview, there is a different kind of light in her presence. Not the glitter of youth, but the gravity of someone who has lived lost and still chooses to keep moving. That perhaps is her greatest gift, the example that even when everything crumbles, love can still endure and brokenness can still shine. As the curtain falls on this story, we are left with a bittersweet reflection. Marie Osmond's life is not just the tale of a celebrity, it is a reminder of the fragile line between the stage and the soul, between the applause we give and the hidden battles we never see. Some stories end with closure. This one lingers like a melody, unfinished, echoing long after the song fades. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know.